Everything you see in here is either haunted, cursed, or has been used in some sort of movie review. Let's talk about The Conjuring Last Rites.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Today, we're here to discuss The Conjuring, The Last Rites. But before we get into that, Daniel, do you want to give the people some movie recommendations?
So this is not completely current, but a few weeks ago, Bob's Burgers finished its latest season, which is the 15th season. A lot of these shows, after 15 seasons, usually drop off in quality. The jokes get tired. The original showrunners leave, and then the show suffers as a result of a new showrunner, stuff like that, right? And Bob's Burgers is just not that way. It's just one of my all-time comfort watches. It remains creative and intelligent, and it has maintained a steady level of quality, which I think is commendable after 15 years. And like, if you've not seen it, it's essentially an animated sitcom about this family that runs a struggling burger restaurant in like the seaside town. And it's basically characters getting into wacky hijinks. There's these sitcom plots, and you've got the three children, you've got the two parents who are running this burger place, and you've got like this cast of eccentric characters. And it's very smart, it's very funny. When it wants to be, it's very heartfelt. Like, there's some really sentimental episodes that, because it's as creative and as smart as it is, most of the time kind of don't overstay their welcome, but actually have something to say and be worthwhile watching. I actually think it's gotten a little bit better over the seasons, and it's not showing any signs of running out of steam. I think that's pretty remarkable after 15 seasons. Like, I think it's got a kind of mixed reputation, and I actually think it's one of the better of these animated sitcoms that kind of is not quite as appreciated as it should be. So that's my recommendation.
Yeah, I can definitely say I think I'm one of those people that probably don't appreciate it as much as it might deserve to be, because it's one that you kind of are always aware of, but I've never checked it out for whatever reason. I've just kind of always looked at it and thought it just didn't have the same appeal as like maybe like a Simpsons or a Family Guy or something along those lines. So yeah, I think I'm one of those people that just looked at it and just passed it up without really giving it a chance, because I can tell you that I've watched a single episode. But I mean, from what you said, it sounds like they do, quite some good stuff with the story and the characters in the show.
Yeah, I think part of it is that it's the humor is very subtle, which sounds a little bit pretentious, but the plots themselves are not that wacky. It's not like Family Guy, where not sure how to describe it. So the humor in Bob's Burgers doesn't come from the plots themselves. Usually, the plots themselves are kind of the setup, but then most of the jokes are kind of in individual lines and offhand comments, while the plot itself is kind of held together by a fairly grounded and wholesome family plot, essentially. And I think that is not everybody's taste. And people are kind of looking for the jokes, but actually you have to kind of really pay attention. Like, the jokes are kind of blink and you miss it kind of thing. And then they're not really in the main plot, so to speak. And I think that is different from a show like The Simpsons or Family Guy or something like that, where it's more about the eccentric characters doing wacky things. I think that's one of the differences. So for that reason, it's got the reputation as being not funny, but I think it's actually really witty in its writing, and actually it holds up a lot better than a lot of these other shows, because it's not simply about the gag.
No, fair. Maybe I'll give it a chance. I'm always on the lookout for kind of easy things to watch in the background when I'm trying to have some dinner or just like blow some steam. So yeah, I can check that out. But from my end, I'm not sure. Actually, I haven't given it much thought, but that's because I've kind of rewatched a few things in the past week that we've already discussed on the channel. Things like Superman, for example. So I don't think I want to mention that. And I've already mentioned about like Dexter, and I think that solid season that ended really well. And I think Peacemaker's also going strong 3 episodes in as well. So I don't really know. I've watched a bunch of stuff, but it's stuff that I've kind of mentioned before and things that I'm like continuing to watch. I guess the newest thing that I probably have watched is Demon Slayer, the anime. And that's mainly because some of my siblings are big anime fans and there's a movie coming out next weekend. So I thought, I'm attending the movie with them. So I was like, let me at least get some semblance as to what the hell this show is about. So I've watched 1 episode so far, and it's your typical intro to story where something tragic's happened to the main character, family's been killed by a demon, and that is essentially pushing him down a path to becoming a demon slayer, essentially. So very basic, very dramatic, as animes tend to be as well. But I thought it was cool. I thought it was an interesting sort of first episode. We'll see how that develops before I get to the movie. I don't know how many episodes I can watch before the movie on the weekend, but yeah, we'll try to get through as many as I can. I don't think there's really any recommendation in there, but there's a few things that I have watched, I've enjoyed. So, you know, if you haven't checked out Dexter, check it out. If you haven't watched Peacemaker, check it out. If you haven't watched Superman, check it out. And if you're into anime, maybe check out Demon Slayer if you haven't already.
All right, shall we move on to the main attraction? So, The Conjuring Last Rites is a supernatural horror movie about the last case investigated by Ed and Lorraine Warren, the demonologists who were the stars of the first 3 Conjuring movies. In it, a family in the 80s experiences a haunting in their Pennsylvania house, and the Warrens are kind of come out of retirement to work this one last case. There's kind of paired with kind of them reminiscing about their life's work and them trying to pass on their work onto the next generation. Meanwhile, their daughter has kind of grown up around what they've been doing, and she's about to get engaged to somebody who is kind of introduced to this world and who then joins this investigation. And they then encounter a demonic entity at this house and decide to help this family. And things unfold from there. So what did we think of The Conjuring Last Rites?
Well, I kind of come into this watching. I think this is the last one of the franchise or of this main series of movies. I haven't watched any of the other movies, so this is the first Conjuring movie that I am watching. So I kind of come into it with not the same expectations and maybe not the same hang-ups that other people came into this movie with. So a lot of the things that people may say are cliche and maybe overdone or they've seen it before, I wouldn't say it was the case for me. Even though there are elements of it where I can recognize, okay, this has been done in the previous movie, or like, you know, you can kind of see the influence or see the inspiration of what some of the jump scares that happen or some of the hauntings that happen in this movie from previous movies. But for me, it felt fresh. It felt like they paid too much attention on the wrong things in this movie as well. I thought a lot of the stuff with the Warrens was kind of played out. It looked like, from an outside looking in, it seemed like they didn't know what to do with the characters anymore. It's like they'd been on multiple adventures and they needed to give the characters something new to do. And they came up with what they came up with in this movie as a way to try and fit some type of narrative into their story and into sort of their characters and kind of show some type of development, because I don't think there was much in there. And the reason I say they focused on the wrong things, because you had this family that was being tormented by these ghosts and these demons that were in their house. And I feel like that was where the best parts of the story potentially could have been, because ultimately we didn't spend enough time with the family, and ultimately a lot of the interesting things that I thought were going to happen with regards to the family didn't happen because we were spending too much time with the Warrens and dealing with their new life or their aging life or this new pace that they were going at. The other thing that I kind of found disappointing as well was the way that they actually dealt with the hauntings that were going on. Because to me, it didn't seem like, when they were actually dealing with the demons, it didn't seem like your experience and you've done this before and you kind of know what you're doing. It kind of felt like they were just still being tricked and, you know, being tormented by the demons in there, the same way that the family were up until a certain point, up until the movie needed them to actually fight back and win the day. But it just felt like they could have been anyone up until a certain point. It didn't feel like their specific expertise were effective outside of, they just knew what was going on and they knew that there was potentially more going on than the one met the eye in that particular house. And that Lorraine had sent like some type of sort of sense for these spirits and these evil things. So I say a mixed bag. I think some of the scares worked for me. There were definitely moments where I felt tense and, you know, some of the jump scares got me. But again, there was like long stretches of not enough of that happening, or there wasn't too much happening in the movie. And I felt like the movie probably could have worked better if it was trimmed down a lot more than what we got. So yeah, overall, I think I'd say positive, but lots of room where it could have been better. Like lots of room for improvement.
Yeah, so I am also pretty new to the franchise. I watched the first 2 Conjuring movies last week when we talked about the first movie. So it's kind of remarkable that we're both new to the franchise and we are already tired of the shtick, right? We're already this is already getting old, and I think this movie in general, I think is really ill-conceived. It has the same. So the thing about The Conjuring is that it basically takes kind of all the standard tropes of like a haunted house or a ghost movie, and it just tells a really high quality version. Like the production values are high, and nothing about it is cheap. It all looks good and whatever. And that is kind of the appeal. Like if you like that kind of story, the Conjuring movies give you that at a high quality. The problem is that it's always the same stuff. So I've seen 3 Conjuring movies in 2 weeks, basically. I've not seen the third one. It's all completely interchangeable. I think the main problem with The Haunting is that it's just the same old tropes kind of recycled. Most of the beats are not motivated. There's no lore behind it that is all that interesting or that makes it different from other haunting stories or even other movies in the same franchise. It's all kind of the same thing warmed over all over again. And then half the movie is the movie telling us what amazing people the Warrens are and what a great legacy they have and all the things they've accomplished. And that part is not interesting, does not convince me that they actually have accomplished anything. And we spend half the movie or more than half the movie on it. The two parts don't really come together in the end. Not really. I think there's like a few lines that kind of suggest that the two things have something to do with each other, but what the entity is and how it is defeated and how the end of the story plays out does not really tie into this idea of legacy and your life's work and looking back on your accomplishments and all these things that are seated in the first half of the story. I don't think any of it comes together. I don't think any of it speaks to each other. It's very much very generically assembled haunting story that is not really about very much. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, I think you brought up several good points. I think if we kind of talk on the hauntings to start off with, it's interesting that you say a lot of these things could be interchangeable. The reason why I can see that without having watched any of the other movies, what is because it doesn't try to do anything new with anything. It doesn't try to do anything innovative at all with the hauntings. Actually, to be fair, actually, the actual like seeing the ghost walking around, I don't know if I've seen that in many other movies. So like again for someone that is seeing it for the first time, actually seeing the guy walk around with an axe and try to actually like attack you and stuff like that, and actually almost be like a real life thing as opposed to always hiding in the shadow and always trying to be a jump scare. I thought that was like okay, that was like interesting, but then the rules of it I just didn't understand as to how real was it and what wasn't real, and if he did get you, what would actually happen, because it was almost like as soon as you maybe like turn the light on or something like that, they just disappear and it wasn't real. Or it was like as soon as the movie needed to take the person out of the torment that they were under, it was like, okay, the thing just disappeared. And one thing I never understand is the rules between the physical world and the demon world, and how much influence or how much control does an evil entity or spirit have over the real world. It just kind of felt like stuff that I'd seen before, minus that part, especially with the father when he was like in bed and he was like lifted and he was being tormented. That kind of like reminded me of the exorcism that we watched many months ago. I'm not a horror person, so to me, it got me in terms of like feeling tense, and there was like moments of like jump scares where it affected me. But overall, it kind of was like a bit predictable and nothing that I hadn't seen before. Like it didn't give me a new scare or it didn't give me something new to fear.
I think the big problem with it is that it's not so the big appeal of the Conjuring movies has always been that it's quite good at creating like an atmosphere and building up like a sense of suspense, and then you've got the big jump scare, right? Like that's kind of the template that these movies are built around. My problem with this movie is not so much that it didn't do anything new. Like there's a lot of very similar stuff, right? Like people walking down dark hallways. There's a scene where where one of the characters, I think it's the daughter of the Warrens, goes into a dark attic with a flashlight, and I think that's where she encounters the mirror. There's like a whole bunch of scenes that are pretty cliche, like within this kind of movie. But the bigger complaint I have about it is that it's not specific. that none of it really ties very specifically to what this demon is doing and what it wants and how it wants to accomplish that. It's all very generic ghost stuff. And that is kind of the biggest sin, where I don't feel like we are discovering something about this demon and what it wants and how it operates and how it can be stopped. It feels a lot like there's like generic haunting stuff happening, and it's not really pieces to a puzzle that come together over the course of the movie, and then by the end you kind of have an idea of what this entity is and what it wants. And I think that is really the big problem. The way it's defeated in the end is basically just that the Warrens pray, and then it's defeated. Like, I didn't feel like there was anything specific to it. It's basically we have a certain runtime, and we want to fill this runtime with horror movie stuff, and then in the end the Warrens do something generic to defeat the monster, and then it's over. And that's kind of how it felt to me. I didn't feel like there was like a build up to the ending, and the ending could have been like, you could swap out any piece, like what the demon is and what it wants and how it's being fought and the setting it's in and who is being haunted and all of these things. You could swap any of them out and it would still work. That's kind of how it feels like to me. And that is like exactly how to not do it. And once you're 4 movies into a franchise, that's a really big problem, because are you not building on stuff that has happened before? Are you not developing ideas? Are you not doing something that is not simply just drawing stuff from the toolbox? If somebody makes like a low budget horror movie about a haunted house, about an exorcism, like, you can draw like certain images and tropes and scenes kind of from a head and kind of assemble them together and get something functional, right? But this is not supposed to be generic. This is supposed to be the story of the Warrens. The movie is being sold as this is the conclusion of the story. Like, the poster says the case that ended it all, but does it? Like, it's not really important that this is like, you could have had this with like Warrens that are 20 years younger. You know what I mean? Like, and it would unfold pretty much the same way. Like, some of the lines would be different, but in terms of how the investigation happens and in terms of, how it's defeated and so on, it all would be the same, I feel like.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. That's kind of where I was saying as well, in terms of their experience when they were actually battling the demons. It really felt like Lorraine was being tormented. It felt like the daughter was being tormented. And it just kind of felt like they didn't really have an answer immediately, or they didn't have like a set of like things that they would try to do to try and defeat the demon. It was just, okay, they're there. They're going to comfort the family and just like stay with the family so that they know that someone's there with them to kind of support them. But it was, I don't know, it just, I just didn't get the feeling that these are the experts in this situation, which was very disappointing, because like I was comparing it to a superhero movie. Imagine this is like the 3rd Iron Man movie or the 3rd Captain America movie. I expect that the way that you deal with a situation or the way you deal with conflict is of someone that's a little bit more experienced, of someone like, the way you like fight or like combat or something moveset, or just like something to show that this isn't your first rodeo in this. And to me, it really felt like they were just making so many like basic mistakes as well. So like, even the daughter hearing her mum calling out for her and then deciding to go in the attic, and it's like, you've lived in this for your whole life. Like, can you not tell when you're being baited by a demon? Even the mum fell for it. I can't remember where like she was in the basement and like the spirit was like attacking her, and she was kind of running away and like cowering from it and stuff like that. And I'm like, you're meant to be the expert. I don't even think this is like the big demon that you're like, or the big evil spirit that you're meant to be fighting in this situation. This is just one that, like you said, was just like in the house and was like more of like a cover for the real like threat that was lurking behind. But that was very disappointing to see in the movie.
I was going to bring up those 2 scenes as well, right? I almost physically threw up my hands in the cinema when those 2 things happened, because it's like, it's written as if this was their first investigation, right? This demon isn't even outsmarting the experts, right? Like, this is not like, okay, we are drawing on 40 years of experience or whatever it is. Like, this is in the 80s. I think they started in the 50s, so at least like it's a lifetime of experience at any case, right? And they even say, "Oh, we started very young." Like Ed talks at one point about how they got started like in their 20s or something. So they have like an entire lifetime of experience and tricks and tools and all of it, right? And they present themselves as these experts, but they never do anything that suggests they know what's going on. Or like you said, like why are they falling for the most basic tricks? Why are they shocked by anything? Why are they scared? Like Lorraine, that like the scene where Lorraine is kind of cowering in fear. It's like you are acting like you've never seen a demon before. Why are you not breaking out like the crucifix or the holy water, or like why are you not prepared? It's kind of the big question here, right? That is kind of really the thing that makes this whole thing feel hollow, because the rest of the movie is about experience and your life's work and passing on the torch or trying to pass on your knowledge to the next generation, and they're not really interested, right? Like the Warrens have this lecture where essentially nobody shows up, right? Like a couple of teenagers show up to make fun of them, and then the last person remains is their daughter, right? And they're trying to pass on their knowledge and nobody cares. The daughter Judy as well, right? Like it's not interested, like she takes it seriously and she knows what her parents have been doing, but she has zero interest in going into the family business, right? There's this whole idea of the Warrens have done all this stuff and the world doesn't care, doesn't appreciate them. And if they stop doing it, then people are back to square one, right? There's nobody else to pick up the torch. There's nobody to continue the work. And why is this not how the demon is defeated at the end? Like why does this not tie into the overall story? Is my question. Like it's just so hollow.
Another part where I thought they were going to do a better tie-in of, the two stories of the two families was, of course, you had Lorraine when she was pregnant had this interaction with the mirror, which caused the crack. And then the second family gifted it to one of their daughters as like a bridal. I can't remember exactly what way it was that she went through or what ceremony it was.
It was confirmation.
Yeah, the confirmation. And I thought that we would get a lot more of her story and like the demon really manipulating her specifically for some type of connection with Judy or I don't know. I don't know how they should have tied it in a little bit better, but by the end of the movie, it really felt like it was all about the Warrens and this second family. It didn't really matter at all. Like they had no meaning or like matter in the story and how it was concluded or like how it played out. It was just a case of, okay, the Warrens have to come together and defeat this. And again, I'm not entirely sure what I was looking for, but I was really hoping that there would be some type of connection. As soon as like I saw the mirror and obviously they had the mirror like many years later, I was like waiting, like, okay, how do you tell the story in the right way so that I'm satisfied that the connection between the two families and what they done many years ago comes to fruition and we get a good story out of it. It just felt like the second family just wasn't a factor after a certain point in the movie. Of course, I know the dad tried to help with moving the mirror after a while, but I don't know. Apart from that, they were just bystanders, really and truthfully.
What I was missing kind of was this idea that it doesn't necessarily have to be like a big scheme, but if there's this whole thing about the Warrens are retired and they haven't worked a case in years, and now they're coming out of retirement for this one case, and the demon is tied to this mirror that Lorraine has a personal connection to. But then the demon does not seem to have a plan. Like it does not seem to engineer a situation that will bring the Warrens out of hiding. You know what I mean? Like it's not made personal at any point, right? They just kind of realize, oh, I know this mirror, and we try to get rid of it, and now it's back. But it didn't come back to them. It came back to this random family that did not even specifically reach out to the Warrens, right? Like there's no sequence of events that sets a trap for the Warrens, and the Warrens walk into it and then realize what's happening once it's too late and now they have to get out or something like that, right? It all seems to be purely coincidental.
And the only real connection is the pastor that killed himself, is how they were able to actually piece it together. But again, if that doesn't happen, then this family just gets tormented by this mirror, and I don't know, the mirror ends up somewhere else for whatever reason. I never really liked that's like one thing I hate about some of these movies is the whole item that won't go away. Like you try to get rid of it and it keeps coming back. I don't know. I just like really bugs me. It doesn't make sense. And this is where I kind of thought that there'd be a better connection with the daughter, like of the second family, and maybe Judy potentially, where they damaged the mirror. And then it was the wrong daughter, because I thought it should have been the daughter that went for a confirmation. But the wrong daughter started vomiting up blood and glass and stuff like that. And I don't know, it could have been a case of because they destroyed this item, and it was like them that had like the last whatever. I mean, it actually wasn't, because it was like the binman that actually put it in the actual bin. So again, I don't know how the rules work, but it could have been a case of, because they destroyed the mirror, somehow they consumed or like released an entity that like was within them or whatever, and that entity needed or wanted Judy or something. I don't know. I don't have the perfect rewrite for the movie, but I just felt like a bit of emptiness in that side of things.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be much that the demon actually wants, other than once it's latched onto a family, it will keep tormenting them. And if you try to get rid of the mirror, it will punish you for it. Right? Like that seems
I
to be more or
actually
less it.
I actually thought that, so you know, they had the whole thing at the start of the movie where Judy was a stillborn for about a minute or so. I actually thought that while she was praying to God, that it was actually the evil entity that kind of gave Judy life, but had planted something within her, and maybe Lorraine had, like, I don't know, done a deal with the devil unwillingly or unknowingly, and had to like undo it or something along the lines. I thought that was like going to be the case, but it's kind of turned out that it wasn't. And I thought that she would have to be confronted by a choice that she made many, many, many years ago. But again, it just didn't materialize how I imagined. And not to say that I'm upset at the movie because it didn't materialize how I wanted, but I'm upset at the movie because it wasted it on unimportant things like focusing on the Warrens and this relationship between Judy and her partner, when we could have got something a little bit more interesting, a little bit more sort of in depth. Like, again, like you said, finding out what the entity actually wanted, and to having a better story between, and having a better connection between the families.
This whole legacy and passing the torch angle, like we've mentioned it briefly, but like that's really a huge part of the movie, right? It's pretty much how it begins, and that's pretty much how it ends. And there are these long sequences, especially when Ed talks to Tony, right, and kind of tries to get a feel for him and tries to explain to him what their family does, right, and why their work is important and why it's not a joke and why it's always going to be in the family and stuff like this, right? They have this entire collection of haunted objects in their basement and all of that, right? So I just felt like there was very little here going on, and I read something somewhere about how it's setting up a spin-off where the next generation takes over because the actors are getting on in years and they can't do this for very much, or they probably maybe don't want to do this for very much longer. But I do not care about these characters, and I do not feel like this movie did anything to really make this interesting, like this whole take over after Ed and Lorraine are gone, right? Or are retired, right? Because that is ultimately how this movie ends, right? With Ed and Lorraine kind of, they solved their last case, they've all made it through, their daughter's getting married, and now they are enjoying retirement for good, right? And they've kind of made peace with this idea. So first of all, in the beginning, they're trying to retire and they're trying to write the book, and they're trying to, I think that they've been talking about writing the book since the first movie, and they're giving these lectures, and they're really unsatisfied, right? It feels like they feel like their work is not done, but they can't. Like Ed has this whole thing about the heart condition, where he wants to do cases, but he can't because he's not healthy enough, and then he still does it. So like this whole thing about like the entire movie is underpinned by things not mattering, right? So they are frustrated in retirement, and Ed wants to do more cases, but he can't physically, and then because of his heart condition, and then they do work a case, and now I don't think it ever matters in the movie, like while he's at the house, that he has a weak heart. Like there's nothing he can't do, or no danger or complication that happens because he has a heart condition, right? And then in the end they live happily ever after, right? Like there's no substance to it, right? There's nothing where I say, okay, I can see how they have overcome this, or how they made this big decision that was like that changed the course of the plot, or whatever it was, right? Like there's lots of things you can imagine, but it's all missing, right? It feels like we have this very generic haunting, and sandwiched in between the story about, like, the sentimental story about the Warrens, and none of the pieces connect. None of the pieces really amount to something. You could imagine like a version of this where the case they have to work is a reflection of maybe their fears, or the reason why they have not been doing cases anymore, or they have to overcome something within themselves to work this case, and they have to jump over their own shadow in some way and maybe take a step they previously weren't willing to take, and then where they end up in the end is a reflection of that choice they've made, right? Like that's what you might call a story. You know what I mean? Like it's just a sequence of events. It's just pieces. It's just one thing happens after another, and then we get a feel good scene at the end. But it's not earned, and it's not the conclusion to our story. And the entire movie is trying to tell us that this is the big conclusion, and I just don't buy it.
I agree, and it's yeah, especially about this being kind of like one big final sort of sender for these characters. On your point about the sort of spin off that they're trying to do, and I'm guessing that they're trying to do it with Judy, because like I think they try to give her a little bit more. I wouldn't say like to do, but kind of show that she was, like her mother, where she was like sensitive to seeing some of these entities and them approaching her and seeing bad things. And they kind of make her overcome it, and it was like her willingness to do good, which landed them in Pennsylvania in this particular movie. But again, it's like I didn't buy into the journey that she went on. I wasn't invested in the development of her character in this. And again, when you make characters make stupid decisions, it's kind of really like throws you off as well, and it kind of puts you off the characters in this. And then you go to the husband that she's now married to. There's some good parts about his character, I can say. I think his whole like that whole like story of why he left the police force, I thought was quite compelling. I thought it was like, quite interesting and quite, I wouldn't say moving, but you can kind of feel the emotion behind it. You can kind of feel like the weight behind it. But again, like outside of that, I don't think there was like much going on with him where I feel like I need to see him in the next movie, or I can't wait to see him again. So I feel like this movie was maybe trying to juggle probably one too many things, something giving a good send off to the old characters, whilst also trying to give us new characters to be invested in. And I think because of that, it just didn't do any of it right, or didn't do enough justification for either of them.
So does the story he tells Ed about why he quit the police force? Because initially, when we find out that he used to be a police officer and he quit under circumstances he doesn't want to talk about, yeah, you get a sense that there's something wrong with him, right? Maybe he's corrupt. Maybe he killed somebody he shouldn't have. Maybe he broke some rule, whatever. Like you get a sense that he's not a good guy because of this, right? And then he actually tells the story, and it's about him kind of getting careless for a second and then surviving through sheer luck because somebody tries to shoot him and it's a misfire. That's the only reason he survives, but he should have been killed that day. He quits the next day and buys the ring for Judy, and basically says, "No, I've kind of realized the value of my life and of how I want to spend the rest of my life. And I realized that if I continue being a police officer, I could die at any moment for no reason, right? Like him dying because he knocks on the wrong door or answers the wrong call, like doesn't accomplish anything, right? It's just a risk of the job, right? And this kind of parallels with the whole idea of the demonologists, right? Because the Warrens also do like this dangerous work, and they could die, like in principle, like in theory, they could die any moment, right? Like every case they go on, every investigation they go on could be the last, right? And that kind of has a parallel with the cop, right? But does it amount to anything? Like, is it actually a character moment? Is it actually, like, you could imagine like a version of this where maybe Ed is like at a crossroads, and then Tony shares his story about how he walked away from his calling because he decided living his life with the woman he loves is more important, and that could have reflected in some way on what the Warrens are doing, but it doesn't, right? It's just a sob story. It's just a sad story. There's nothing, like nothing happens because of it, and it does not trigger a decision another character makes, and doesn't change the course of the plot. It doesn't tie into what the story is about, I don't think. Or does it?
No, I don't. I don't think it does. I don't think it feeds the story at all. But at least it's a nice sub story. Is the only thing I can give it.
I don't hate the guy. Like he's okay to watch, right? But it's more like, why does nothing connect to anything else? Why is there not an overall bigger point being made? Why is there not, like, why does it not build to something? That's really what it would take for this to be a good story, and it just isn't. What did you think of the Warrens? So, did you know who the Warrens were? First of all, yeah, that's the first question. Did you know who the Warrens were?
I actually didn't. So when the movie ended, I was actually kind of ready to just get up and leave. And then it had that whole spiel at the end of the movie about like the Warrens, and they started showing pictures, and I was like, oh, like this is actually, I was gonna say interesting, but I was like, oh, like when you're dealing with like evil spirits and then and all that stuff. Because I know like when they say based on the true story, it's like kind of like loosely based on it. But I was like, I want no part of that whatsoever. I don't even want to know that even one of the cases that they worked on was semi-real. So I looked at it. I appreciated the pictures for about like 30 seconds, and I was like, okay, time to get the hell out of here, because that's not the type of true story that I want to be aware of. It's interesting. It is interesting that they were real people, and that there were like real stories behind it, and it'd be very interesting to actually like understand the case that they worked on. And they obviously got to a level where they were famous enough for movies to be made of them. So it'd be interesting to see kind of what the public perception was of them, whether they were like grifters or whether what they did was actually real. But the movie Warrens, I don't feel like this was probably like a good movie for me to get like a good gauge of them as people and them as some of the characters. I feel like the movie maybe didn't represent them in the right way. And when you got Ed kind of battling his heart condition for most of the movie, and that's pretty much all his character really serves in the story, outside of of course supporting with getting rid of the entity, it's not really the best representation of like this is a character I want to follow. This is a sort of a journey that I want to get behind. And again, that's like the downside of coming into this in the last movie, where maybe there was more to his character before that, and maybe there was like more compelling things about his character that you could sort of really invest in prior to that. But yeah, I don't know.
So we kind of talked about this a little bit in our conversation about the first Conjuring, where Ed and Lorraine Warren are these legendary
I wasn't
figures
there.
in.
You might need to remind me, because I wasn't part of that conversation.
I'm building to it. So there were these legendary figures in the paranormal world since like from the 50s until I think the 80s. They did all these investigations that really informed like how the paranormal investigation world works and the stories that are being told. There's several really famous hauntings or alleged hauntings that they investigated, and their stories are kind of the story of how these things go. What essentially happened is that Ed died around like 2009 or so, and Lorraine then sold the rights to their cases to this movie studio, right, to turn into movies, kind of with the stipulation that they could only portray them in a positive light. And so, because there's like if you want to research specifically Ed's history, there's some allegations there that are not very nice and not very consistent with how they are portrayed in the movie. But in the movie, they are just saints, right? And they are just like the most noble people ever and the most like these unappreciated geniuses and so on, right? That like the world doesn't appreciate what they've done for them and so on. And it's like once you dig into a little bit into the actual history, there's not a whole lot there. The haunting that's portrayed here, like some of the most basic details kind of match what happened in this house in Pennsylvania in the 80s. But it's like very loosely based, right? But the movies themselves present themselves as this is the true story, right? So a lot of horror movies describe themselves as this is based on a true story, this really happened. Normally I completely ignore it because it's just what everybody says and it's never true. But these movies are specifically these very specific cases by these specific people that did this work for decades and never really produced anything that anybody could describe as evidence, where you say, okay, this is clearly real and we can see what they did, and they have real expertise that really helps us understand these phenomena, right? And the movies kind of have to split this difference where they are these experts who've done so much good, but also they can never have any impact on anything because they didn't in the real world, right? They didn't found a school that has been churning out exorcists for like since the 80s, right? Like this is not what happened, right? They basically worked some cases, wrote some books, gave a whole bunch of interviews, and charged admission to the museum in their basement where you could see the haunted dolls, right? That's pretty much it. But then the movie kind of has to play it up as these were these really significant and important people. So my question was a little bit like, as somebody who doesn't know anything about this, like when you realized that this was supposed to be about real people and they started showing like the pictures at the end, like you say, you didn't stay very long for it, right? But did it color your reception of the movie and what kind of movie it was and what it was about and what it meant? Did it influence that at all?
No, because I feel like I've always been under the impression that when it says based on a true story, it's always based loosely on a true story, and it's not 100%. And I don't take these type of movies as like things like biopics, for example, where most of it's accurate or most of the events. And I know, I think I saw one thing where the pastor actually did kill himself on, in a different way than what happens in this movie. So I can kind of see like that actually happened in real life. But in terms of the case and in terms of how it played out, I kind of was just under the impression that it was embellished a little bit and just sort of glamorized and stretched. Like the reality of it was stretched a lot more than what actually happened in the real world. So I think just because I had those expectations, it didn't really change my opinion of the movie of like, oh, like maybe I should like take a little bit more serious, or maybe I should take it a little bit less serious, or anything like that. It was just like, oh, these were actually real people. That's quite interesting. And to be honest, my first thought was, I wonder how they were perceived and whether they were like perceived as like grifters a little bit. To be honest, so yeah, no real bearings on my thoughts on the movie.
It does not mention the skeptics at all, right? Throughout the movie, right? I think there's some indication that they're not being taken seriously, right? But then the ending has this big text about how they basically, essentially, it portrays them in the way you would somebody who was like this big civil rights activist who kept fighting this noble fight, and decades later, people appreciated for how much ahead of their time they were, right? Like that is how it's worded, and that's how it's presented, right? But it's nothing of the sort happened with this, right? It's not like 30 years later we are looking at what they did and said, oh yeah, like now we appreciate what they were doing and how much far ahead of the time they were, right? But the movie really wants you to believe this, right?
It does, and again, I think it's just like my expectations of the movie, where of course they're going to over glamorize their leads in these movies and like overstate their importance because these were people that I weren't aware of, and they weren't any ones that I ever like even like closely heard mentioned in anything. It's not like, for example, something like the Iron Claw that we watched, where there's names that I can like refer to. So even if I didn't know the main sort of wrestlers that were the sons of that movie, I knew a Hulk Hogan, I knew like a Roddy Piper or something along those lines, where it's like, oh, like there's that interaction, there's that connectivity to something that I'm familiar with. And in that movie, I don't think that they like over glamorized any of their leads. But essentially, the point I'm trying to make is that there wasn't that connectivity for me with the Warrens, where I can be like, oh, there's like cultural relevance to something I know or someone I know or something that I know is like tied into it at all. So I don't think, even as the movie's trying to sort of overstate their importance and overstate their influence on the world, it never really connected with me that way. And I think that's just me. And obviously I think, for other people it might have played out a little bit differently, and maybe something that they really bought into. These two were some like great figures or something along the lines. I think at most it just piqued my interest. Like, oh, these were actually real people. Like I kind of wonder what the actual like real story was, but behind these people. But it was never. These two were like really important in history.
I'm in a similar situation kind of with the Iron Claw, right? Because I could not care less about wrestling, right? But I can watch the Iron Claw, and it's this really well-made drama about this family of three wrestlers, right? Who are basically being raised by their parents to be wrestlers, and it destroys all of them essentially. And these are real people who really wrestled and who really did generally the things that are portrayed in the movie. And you can look up their histories, and you can kind of see, okay, this is like it was in the movie, and this is different, and this is kind of the bottom line, and I can kind of get an opinion about how close the two things are, right? And here it's just, there's just nothing there. Like there's nothing about the story that at all connects to the real life Warrens. So as far as I'm aware, this was not the last case they worked. This was not the one they came out of retirement for. This is not the one where they kind of introduced their daughter and son-in-law into being demon hunters or demonologists. You know what I mean? Like it has nothing to do with what actually happened. Like, as far as I'm aware, this was one of the many cases they worked and kind of gave interviews about and maybe wrote a book about later on. but it does not seem to be any different. It just so this entire framing of this is the case that ended it all, it's just made up for the movie entirely. But then the movie, like this end crawl, makes it seem as if they made this really important contribution, but they never show it, right? Like if this is meant to be like, and I understand that this is just kind of like a ghost story kind of riding on the coattails of the name, right? Because people who are into the paranormal know Ed and Lorraine Warren, they know the Amityville haunting, they know the Enfield haunting, they know like the Annabelle doll and all of these things, right? These are all stories you pick up if you are into that kind of topic at all. But this is not the story. Like this is not the story of the Warrens. This is a fairly generic ghost story that happens to have characters called Ed and Lorraine Warren in them. And there's some connections, like the Warrens were also very devout Catholics, for instance. But they were kind of at odds with the Vatican because they didn't like all the reforms that happened in them. And so they were really these old school, hardcore Catholics and stuff like this. So there's a few connections here, but this is not the story of the Warrens, right? And then the movie kind of ends with this admonishment about how we really should appreciate them more, but they don't show them doing anything. Like there's nothing where you say, okay, this is what they actually did, this is what they actually accomplished, and we should recognize them for it, right? It's just a general purpose. Oh, these people were unappreciated in their time, but now we know better. But it doesn't say why.
I'm not in the paranormal circle, but I don't really hear about hauntings or things like that, or people being tormented by evil spirits, really and truthfully. So it's not like they did all this fantastic work when everyone was skeptical, and then like now it's like common like knowledge that okay, like these were like pioneers in this, and actually you need to be aware of any of it. It's like I don't know, you kind of just like shrug at it, and like that's kind of why I say when I was saying about like being interested to know if they were like seen as grifters or not, because my first thing is like I don't know how like legit or how how much they actually believed in it and how much of it was them kind of making things up to make a little bit of money. That's not to go against anyone that believes in like paranormal activity or anything like that, but it's just not my reality. So immediately my first thing is how are they convincing people that like what they were doing were actually real?
Like I'm a little bit of a folklore nerd where I've read the stories of the Warrens, and I can appreciate, like, even if I don't believe that any of it really happened, I can still appreciate the stories for what they are, right? But I didn't even get that. Like, this is not even really like a treatment of the stories as the Warrens told it. You know what I mean? Like, it could have been that too. But then it's not simply a generic ghost story that happens to use some of the names, because it insists too much on its own importance just to do that. So, like, the entire thing is just misaligned. And it doesn't pick a lane, and it doesn't have a clear identity of what it wants to do. It kind of wants to have its cake and eat it too, in that sense, right? It wants the legitimacy of, like, we are talking about something that's real, but also we don't accept the responsibility to actually do that, right? In the end, we're just telling a silly ghost story people can enjoy. You know what I mean? Like it's like this entire thing. I didn't know any about this like 2 weeks ago, and I kind of just knew of the Conjuring movies as a thing that was popular, but it seemed to be like a series of movies that was kind of a very archetypical ghost story, and that just happens to be well made, and that happens to really take off with a whole lot of people. And then I wade into this, and I'm a little bit disoriented in terms of what it's actually trying to be. And it kind of puts me a little bit on the defensive as a viewer, because I feel like the movie's trying to convince me of something, but then it doesn't make a real attempt to convince me. You know what I mean? Like, I did not walk out of this movie being challenged on what I thought about the Warrens. It's just all a big mess. And then the movie isn't even that good. Like if all of this was just noise surrounding a really well-made story with some good scares and really memorable set pieces and whatever, I would say, okay, fine. This is what it is. But it's kind of this muddled mess where it tries to be several things at the same time, but doesn't do any of them properly.
Yeah.
I want to make one last point. So it does not have to be this way. Like, if people are saying, well, what do you expect from a movie like this? Well, watch the show Supernatural, because that is very similar. This is like 13 seasons of these two brothers hunting ghosts throughout America, right? But in every episode they come up with an interesting scenario, and something like there's like a secret to uncover, or there's like a memorable way in which the haunting works or the demon works or whatever, or what it wants, or how it relates to another character or whatever. Like there are actually really interesting stories going on in that show, and that shows that you can actually tell a ghost story that actually amounts to a little bit more than, oh, did you hear that? And let's walk down this dark corridor until we're startled by something coming out of the shadows, right? You can do a lot more with this template. And I'm a little bit confused why people like these movies so much. Like this made $150 million in the opening weekend. That's superhero money. This is one of the bigger successes of the year, right? In terms of its opening weekend, and we'll see how far it goes. But it's like, it doesn't even do anything cool.
Yeah, I was a bit shocked with how packed the theater was when I went to the cinema to go see it. I don't know. Maybe it's just like one of those. It's like it's a franchise, and I think from what I've gathered is that people liked the first two enough that maybe they were hoping that this one would be better than what the third one was. And again, I've not seen all of them, but again, it just seems like this is just one of the horror movies that kind of found an audience, and the audience kind of still has a level of faith in the franchise to show up for the movie again. But I think at this point, I don't know how many show up for a next one or how many show up for a spin-off. I'm aware of the Annabelle movies. I don't know how much money that made, but I know that seems popular. I believe. I think that's kind of like a popular spin-off that's like tied to this universe.
It's a little bit puzzling as somebody who's not steeped in that franchise. Like, why this and not something else? Is it just because James Wan makes really nice looking movies? Like they're well made movies, well shot, well acted, and all of that, right? Like they're not bad. It just is that it? Is it just the production values? I'm not sure.
Actually, from what I've seen, is everyone was kind of trashing this director and saying that ever since this guy's come on board, James Wan, is that the franchise has kind of taken a bit of a nosedive. So I'm actually doing a quick check. So I've got it backwards. Yeah, basically James Wan, everyone loved, but then he stepped away. I think he made Aquaman, I believe. I think he stepped away for Aquaman. Because of that, had someone else come on board, and the franchise has just taken a dive from there. So I don't know. That's like a whole other conversation about director's vision versus what the company or the film studio's vision is for a particular franchise, and if the original idea came from the director, and everything good about the franchise was from the director's idea, how beneficial is it to kind of stray away from that and maybe not be patient in that way? But I don't know. That's a whole other conversation for another day.
Yeah, and I don't know if story was by James Wan. I don't think it is. I'm not sure, but like these complaints apply from the first movie, right? Where like maybe the first time it's a little bit fresh, but then since then it's kind of the same template over and over again. So I was just underwhelmed as I was watching it. Like as I was going through these movies, it's kind of like the fourth one. Like the thing that really gets me about this one is that it does not feel like the fourth and final movie in a series, right? Because it feels like, we talked about how it feels like they haven't learned anything, they don't know anything, and they were, experiencing a haunting for the first time. But why are they not acting differently than in the first movie, right? So the entire thing, I think, is just not thought through, and I think they're coasting on the brand and on kind of these famous names. And if they didn't have that, maybe they would try a little bit harder with the story.
Yeah, I guess with that, last thoughts on the movie.
Just bottom line of it is, I don't think it adds, like the pieces add up to anything. I don't think it says anything. I don't think it's about very much. All the things that are in here about, legacy and passing the torch and someone's life work and being proud of that, but being unappreciated and all of that. These are all ideas that are in here, and you could have told a story about that was kind of reflected in the actual haunting and what actually happens in the movie, and it doesn't. And as a result, it looks nice, but it's an empty suit. There's not very much to it. And I just did not have a good time watching the movie. And then it ends with this admonishment about how we should appreciate the Warrens more, which I think is both unearned by the movie and not borne out by the actual effects of what they actually did. And so this entire thing just left a sour taste in my mouth as I was walking out of the theater. And I don't think I will watch another Conjuring movie. Not because I'm, offended or anything like that. It's more I'm just not convinced that there's very much here. So that's a 5 out of 10 rating for me.
I think we actually might match on a rating. First time. And first time, and that's only because you've done a normal rating for the very first time. But I think I also land at a 5 out of 10 for this movie. I can definitely see the positives within the franchise and why some of the earlier movies would have attracted a decent audience or a decent following from it, because I do think some of the horror elements, I do feel like the idea behind it is interesting. I just feel like they made the wrong story choices in this movie, and because they made the wrong story choices, or they didn't really hit the exclamation point on some elements of the story, is that it just kind of felt very long, very drawn out, and again, at the end of it, quite pointless with not much to say, which is unfortunate because I didn't really hate my experience with it. So yeah, again, 5 out of 10 for me on my side. And I guess with that, we reached the end of this week's episode. As always, thank you very much for working with us. We appreciate your support. We appreciate you being on this journey with us. And as always, if you liked what you heard today and you enjoyed our discussion, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense, then I have a very special Annabelle doll for you. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
Bye-bye.
See you later.